Hello there, I am fine art photographer and Olympus educator Matt Suess, and tonight we're going to talk about handheld high-res shooting on the brand new OM-D E-M1 Mark III. Now, I have a pre-production unit here. This is being recorded on February 6th. The camera is set to be released on the 12th. I got some gaffer's tape hiding some key information on this camera because I don't want anyone spotting me out in the field photographing this. But one of the cool features that's on this camera, this new camera, is being able to shoot in high-res mode. So this is normally a 20 megapixel camera, but you have the option of being able to shoot 50 megapixels handheld or 80 megapixels on a tripod, just like on the EM1X. So why would you want to shoot in 50 megapixel mode? Well, a couple reasons. One, you're going to be able to print a lot larger. Starting from 50 megapixels, you can do some really nice enlargements and have a whole lot of detail in that. Number two, if you need to crop in on your image, cropping in from a 50 megapixel image is going to give you a lot more resolution. Obviously, you can crop in a lot more and still be able to do a large print with a lot of megapixels. And a third benefit is that you can actually, when you're shooting in the handheld high-res mode or even tripod mode, you end up getting the equivalent of up to two stops of ISO sensitivity, so improvement. So basically, you know, if you're shooting this at ISO 800, it's kind of almost like the equivalent of shooting it at ISO 200 or even 400. So you get a reduction in noise. So you get the detail, the noise, the extra megapixels. Now, how does it do that? You know, well, first you put it in the mode. You got to get it into the handheld high-res mode, and I'll show you how to do that on the back of the camera. And then once you're doing that, you just shoot and fire away. And what it's going to do is when you press the shutter, it's going to end up taking 16 images all at once really fast. And you'll see a little icon that says, you know, the high-res icon that's in your viewfinder. And then you'll end up seeing a busy, that'll say busy, and there'll be a line going across because it has to then compile all those 16 images. So it takes 16 images. The camera is relying on actually you moving around a little bit. You know, the image stabilization is going to be great on this camera, but it actually relies on you moving around just a little bit so it can get more megapixels into that image and then stack them all together into one final image that ends up being 50 megapixels. So with the equivalent of 16 photos it's taken, it's building that 50 megapixel image from basically 320 megapixels of information. So again, sharper image, a lot more megapixels, a lot more detail, and an improvement in the noise. So it's really a win-win when you need to get those extra megapixels and get all that detail. Now, I personally use the handheld high-res as often as I can. There are some situations that you want to pay attention to that you will not be able to use it on. If you have a subject that's moving, like wildlife, you're not going to be able to do it. You need to have a static subject. The subject isn't moving. Now, if you have trees or grass that's blowing a little bit, I've actually had some good images on windy days. It just kind of makes it look like I used a slow shutter speed because those leaves and the grass, they just kind of blur together as if I used a long shutter speed. But if you try doing that on a wildlife subject or, you know, a portrait where people are moving, you're not going to get a good result because those 16 images, you're going to have movement throughout the image, and when it blends it all together, you're going to have a blurred subject. Now, I have done wildlife shots when the animal is sleeping or just super, super still. You know, think of reptiles, you know, just sitting there staring at you, or even, you know, an elk or something that's just laying down on the ground in an afternoon nap. Those situations, you might be able to get away with the handheld high-res. But other than that, landscapes are perfect for this. If you need to do any macro work, that's going to be great for it too. If you're photographing artwork, the perfect situation is to photograph artwork, get all those megapixels, get all that detail in the artwork that you're photographing. We're out here in the Sonoran desert, so let's go ahead and get some photos in the handheld high-res, and then later on, I'll show you how I'm processing these in the computer. Let's get some photos. There's a nice shot right there. Sun just coming down on the horizon. Let me go get some more before that sun totally disappears. Yeah, the thing is with these, with being able to shoot this in handheld high res at 50 megapixels, you know, who needs those big bulky full frame cameras? When I switched over from Sony to Olympus with the EM1X that I had, being able to have that 50 megapixel and 80 megapixel mode was a really big, kind of like a determining factor for me, because I do print really large and I do need those extra megapixels. So being able to have this now in a small form factor, you can, I mean, this camera is tiny, and I'm using the 12 to 100 millimeter lens. And this is just great for walking around. I can see myself using this a lot for my landscapes now, and especially when I want to go hiking and I don't have to bring the big bulky EM1X. And I still love the EM1X, perfect for wildlife, perfect for any sports or action. But now being able to hike with this, awesome. Be sure to let me know if any of you have used the high-res modes on any of the other Olympus cameras. The EM1 Mark II has a high-res mode, but you have to be on a tripod, and I believe that's 50 megapixels. But now with the Mark III, you can do the handheld at 50 or on the tripod at 80. Okay, let me show you how this is going to work here out in the field. I mentioned that it takes a couple seconds to process it. So here we are. I'm going to take a picture, and as soon as I hit the shutter, what it's going to do, you'll see a little green flashing on the bottom, and it's only going to last for a flash, and that's it taking all those 16 photos, and then it's going to say busy for a little bit. So here we go, and now it's taking the photo, and that was it. And now it's just going to say busy for about 10 or 14 seconds. It's processing that into that high-res 50 megapixel image. Can't do anything with the camera until it's done. And there we go. Let's take a look at that. Very cool. All right, that's enough of filming me out here in the field. I'm gonna stick around though and try and see if there's any more light in this fading sunset. But stick around, don't leave the video yet, because what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna show you how to process these images in the digital darkroom. I'll give you some tips and tricks on getting the most out of these high-res files. So I'll see you right away. All right, I am now back in my studio, and as you've seen in the video, I got some really cool shots using the handheld high-res mode of the EM1 Mark III. I'm gonna go through explaining on how I processed a couple of those photos, but first I wanted to show you how I set up my camera to photograph in the handheld high-res. Let me bring this over here and see if I can get this on this camera. So what you're gonna wanna do is hit the menu button, and then it is in shooting menu number 2, you'll find the handheld high-res shot mode. So click on that with the OK button, and then you have high-res shot, and down here, shooting method, handheld or tripod. So if you're shooting it on the tripod, you'll be shooting it in the 80 megapixel mode. You need to be on a tripod for that. Otherwise, handheld, that's what I was using out in the desert. Handheld mode will give you 50 megapixels. So click on the OK. And then up on top here, the high res shot, I have this set for 1 second. So when you press the shutter, it's gonna wait 1 second before it starts taking the picture. And I just do that just for stability reasons, so that when I hit the shutter, I can then really make sure that I'm standing still, because you don't wanna be moving a whole lot when you are shooting in the handheld high res mode. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some photos now that I processed. So we'll start off with the cactus photo that I shot, and we'll take a look here. We can see here in the Olympus Workspace now, just to let you know, this is a pre-production camera that I'm using, and the Olympus Workspace software, it's working fine with these photos, but I think they're gonna be updating it once this camera does get released on February 12th. I'm not really expecting any visual changes in the software, but I don't know for sure. So just keep that in mind that I'm using the older Olympus Workspace, but it is still working with these files. So if we hover over the thumbnail, we can see all the specs, all the metadata that I used to photograph this image. Looking along the bottom, we can see the pixel size, the 8160 by 6120 pixels. That means that I shot that in the 50 megapixel mode. The camera will also record one individual RAW file, and that RAW file is 5184 by 3888 pixels. That's the native resolution for the camera, the 20 megapixel. So you'll end up getting that file as well. Plus you'll also get a JPEG file too that is in the 50 megapixel size. We're only going to work with the 50 megapixel RAW file. That is the .orf file. Now, one other thing I do want to mention though is that the 20 megapixel file that it does produce, it's a .ori file. Now, Olympus Workspace can see that and process that file fine, but other software programs like Lightroom can't see that. If you do want to process that 20 megapixel file, change the extension from .ori to .orf. And then Lightroom, other photo programs will be able to recognize that RAW file and process it. Let's take a look at what I did here to this file. You can see the before and after right here on the screen. What I wanted to do was bump up the contrast, add a little bit of saturation. Let's take a look at the settings that I did do. I'll go over here into the basic settings. Didn't do anything with the exposure compensation. I did adjust the custom white balance a little bit. I left it in picture mode vivid. That's what I have my camera always defaulted to anyways. And we'll scroll down a little bit here. I gave it a little bit of clarity, a little bit of dehaze, gave it a little bit of an S-curve in the curve section here, the tone curve. That gave it a little bit more contrast, a little more pop to the image. And I brightened up my midtones, dropped down my shadows a little bit to darken that background, gave it some contrast and some saturation. And I have my color space in Adobe RGB. Outside of that, we'll take a look here. On the sharpening, I did give it a sharpness of 0.8 plus 0.8. Now, once I had those settings done on the file looked really nice there. Went to File and Export, and I exported it as a 16-bit TIFF. Now, here's where the fun part comes in, because I'm going to open this file up in Photoshop, and let's go ahead and take a look at that here. We'll take a look at this at 100%, just as I exported it out of the Olympus software. And looks pretty good, really nice, looks pretty sharp, but I found that there's a sort of a secret sauce for these high-res shots, and that is using Sharpen AI from Topaz. What that's gonna do is really help the sharpness a lot, and let's take a look. I already ran this, and I'll show you, I'll go run through it in a second here, but I already ran it on this file, and let me turn that layer on. And look at the difference there. You can see a little bit more sharpness. It really does bring out all the detail that you're getting from this high-res mode. Let's go ahead and see how I did that. I'll go from scratch here. I'll delete that layer. On my Mac, I'll hit Command-J to duplicate that layer. And then I'll go up into Filter, Topaz Labs, and Sharpen AI. And I'm going to show you the settings that I use for the handheld high-res mode. So let me bring the preview box over here, and if you look over here on the right, we have select the processing mode. Sharpen, stabilize, and focus. Use stabilize. Click on stabilize, and then you can click on auto. It's going to auto scan your file and determine with the AI what to do for the sharpening. I'm going to click on update preview, and then it's going to generate the preview of what the AI determined to do for the sharpening. Now look at that, it brought out all of that detail. Let me click on original, so before and the after. Now you can go ahead and adjust these sliders a little bit more if you want. Remove blur. If you want to increase the sharpness, drag that to the right. Suppress noise. If you're getting some noise, starting to see some noise in your image, start dragging that to the right as well. And lastly, you have an add grain option. If your photo is really noisy, you might want to try adding some grain to try and hide that noise. Once you're done with the settings and you got the sharpness that you want out of the file, click on apply. Now I'll tell you, this is not a speed demon type of a program. It does take a while, it takes a few minutes, especially on these 50 megapixel files. So don't be alarmed that it is a slow program in processing this, but the results are totally worth it. Let's go ahead and take a look at another photo. Let's go to the sunset photo, and one of those sunset photos, and let's go to this one here. Okay, here's that sunset photo. This is the 50 megapixel file that we're looking at, and we can see the before and the after. And let's take a quick peek at what I did to process that. Brightened up the exposure compensation just a little bit, adjusted some of the custom white balance settings on that, left it in picture mode vivid, scrolled down a little bit further, gave it a little bit more clarity and some dehaze, and again, a very slight S-curve to really help with the contrast and the real jump and the real pop to the image. Scroll down a little bit more, added a little bit more contrast down here and some saturation. And we'll go back into the sharpening area. I gave it a sharpness value of plus 0.8. After that, I exported it as a 16-bit TIFF, brought it into Photoshop, and then ran the Sharpen AI on it. Let's take a look at what that Sharpen AI did. We'll go into this at 100%. This is with that Sharpen AI off and with the Sharpen AI on. You can definitely tell that the Sharpen AI in the stabilization mode with these handheld high-res photos, it makes a world of a difference. Well, that's all the time I have for now. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and a walkthrough on using the Olympus OM-D E-M1 Mark III in handheld high-res mode out in the field and post-processing it on the computer. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments down below. Definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll be doing a whole lot more videos on this camera and photography in general. And I also have some links to software in my description on this video, including some savings on this specific software from Topaz, the Sharpen AI, and on all of their software as well. So until next time, I'm Matt Suess, and I'll talk to you later.